In the shadows of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, a man whose name would become synonymous with terror built his empire of death. H. Holmes, a man of charm, intelligence, and ruthless ambition, would become America's first known serial killer. This is the chilling tale of deception, murder, and a nightmare that haunted the streets of Chicago. Herman Webster Mudgett was born on May 16, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Growing up in a strict family, he was always an intelligent but troubled child. His fascination with death started early when, as a young boy, he was said to have enjoyed torturing animals. It was his academic mind that led him away from the quiet rural life into the world of higher learning. Mudgett enrolled at the University of Michigan's medical school in 1879, where he would eventually become known for his manipulative behavior. He learned the basics of medicine, but, more importantly, he learned how to exploit the living and the dead, and it was here that his dark path began. After graduating from medical school in 1884, Mudgett changed his name to Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. A fresh start in Chicago seemed to offer endless opportunities, but his ambition was darker than most could imagine. In 1886, he came across a pharmacy that was for sale, a perfect opportunity for his devious plans. In a move that would signal the beginning of a long string of deceptions, Holmes bought the property and established his first public identity as a trustworthy businessman. But hidden within that seemingly legitimate business was something far more sinister. The true horror of Holmes' plans would be revealed with the construction of a massive building near the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. Holmes' so-called World's Fair Hotel would become a labyrinthine nightmare. Designed with trapdoors, soundproof rooms, secret staircases, and hidden passageways, the hotel became the perfect hunting ground for his victims. Some rooms were constructed with gas chambers, others with airtight vaults. Many of the rooms were designed for death, where Holmes could easily dispose of bodies without anyone suspecting a thing. For Holmes, the World's Fair Hotel was more than just a business. It was his deadly playground. But how many died here? The answer is lost to history, but it is believed that dozens, if not hundreds, fell victim to his cruelty. Holmes' victims were often women who had come to Chicago to find work or a new life. He lured them in with promises of employment, marriage, or safety. But once inside his hotel, their fates were sealed. Many of these women were never seen again, their bodies disappearing without a trace. Here are some of his most well-known female victims. 31-year-old Julia Connor and her husband Dr. Lawrence Connor moved into the World's Fair Hotel. Shortly after Julia and Holmes started an affair, when Connor found out about Julia's affair with Holmes, he quit his job and moved away, leaving Julia and their 5-year-old daughter Pearl Connor behind. Julia gained custody of Pearl and remained at the hotel, continuing her relationship with Holmes. Julia and Pearl both disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891. Holmes initially claimed that Julia had left unexpectedly to visit her dying sister, but then changed his story and said that she had fled with her former husband. Ultimately, Holmes later claimed that Julia had actually died during an abortion. Despite his medical background, Holmes was unlikely to be experienced in carrying out abortions, and mortality from such a procedure was high at that time. Holmes then claimed to have poisoned Pearl, likely to hide the circumstances of her mother's death. A partial skeleton, possibly of a child around Pearl's age, was found when excavating Holmes's cellar. Pearl's father was a key witness at Holmes's trial in Chicago. 23-year-old Emmeline Sigrant began working in Holmes's building in May 1892 and worked for him for 6 months. Holmes hired Sigrant as a secretary. She disappeared, and though her exact cause of death is unknown, Holmes confessed to having killed her. It's likely she was one of the many women who fell victim to Holmes' manipulative charms. In early 1893, 24-year-old Minnie Williams was a woman Holmes lured from Fort Worth, Texas, with promises of marriage and wealth. She was reportedly killed in the murder castle. Holmes dismembered her body and later used her identity to commit fraudulent acts. 18-year-old Nanny Williams was Minnie's sister, who was also killed by Holmes. The exact method of her death is unclear, but it's believed that she was murdered shortly after Minnie, possibly as part of Holmes' ongoing scheme to defraud insurance companies and collect the life insurance payouts. In 1892, Emily Van Tassel, a young woman from New York. Holmes promised Emily a job at his hotel. He likely lured her into his building, where he either killed her outright or gassed her in one of the specially designed rooms. Emily vanished, and her fate remains one of the many mysteries surrounding Holmes' crimes. Holmes didn't stop at women. He also lured men, including business partners. In 1894, Benjamin Pittazel, a carpenter and associate of Holmes. Holmes murdered him as part of an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Holmes killed Pittazel and set up a plan where his wife would collect the insurance money, which he planned to keep for himself. He then murdered his 3 children in an attempt to collect the insurance money. 7-year-old Howard Pittazel was one of Benjamin Pittazel's children. Holmes murdered him, along with his siblings, as part of the fraudulent insurance scam. Howard's body was disfigured to make it unrecognizable in an attempt to stage his death as part of the fraud. 13-year-old Alice Pittazel was another of Benjamin Pittazel's children. Like her siblings, Alice was likely killed by Holmes, though her remains were never found. Holmes' killing of Pittazel's children was part of a larger conspiracy to collect insurance money, which he never intended to share. 9-year-old Nellie Pittazel was another of Benjamin Pittazel's children. Holmes used these children to deceive their mother, and he murdered them all. Their bodies were disposed of in various ways, with no formal identification of all the victims. It wasn't just murder that made Holmes notorious. He was also a master of deception. He would stage deaths, forge documents, and even collect life insurance policies under false identities. It wasn't until Holmes' greed and fraud caught up with him that authorities began to unravel the tangled web of lies. Benjamin Pittazel's disappearance in 1894 triggered a police investigation that would soon uncover Holmes' deadly secret. As investigators followed the trail of deceit, they began to uncover the horrors of the murder castle. The building that had once seemed so innocuous now revealed its deadly purpose. Bodies were discovered, along with evidence of Holmes' surgical knowledge and his ability to manipulate his victims. The walls of the murder castle seemed to whisper the stories of those who had perished there. Holmes was arrested in 1895, and his trial was one of the most sensational of the era. He was charged with multiple murders, including the killing of Pittazel and his children. Despite his attempts to manipulate the court and the media, he was convicted. Holmes was sentenced to death by hanging. On May 7, 1896, he was executed in the Cook County Jail. But even in his final moments, Holmes remained a figure of mystery, claiming to be innocent, though his crimes had already sealed his fate. The real number of victims remains a mystery, with estimates ranging from 20 to over 200. But the legend of H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, continues to captivate people to this day. Holmes' life and death have inspired countless books, documentaries, films, and conspiracy theories. But even now, more than a century later, the truth behind his motivations, his full list of victims, and the true scope of his crimes remains obscured. H. Holmes was a man of many faces. A businessman, a doctor, a murderer. His story is one of manipulation, deception, and darkness. But it also serves as a chilling reminder of how evil can thrive hidden in plain sight. Today, the murder castle no longer stands, but the legacy of H. Holmes endures, a haunting chapter in the history of American crime, and a reminder of the horrors that can be hidden behind a smile. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for more true crime content and check out our other videos on